A few years ago, I realized how awful some normal/piercing armor hybrid sets were compared to each other. I then created the small infographic detailing the boons and banes of each armor in a progression. Now, I'm no graphic artist, so I'm not entirely sure how I could create a better graphic. I mean, look at some of my thumbnails. So I guess this will be a ranking video in a sense. There's going to be some simplifications made before going into the video though. I'm only going to compare normal piercing armor hybrid sets. This excludes the Dragon Scale Mail set and the Radiant Silver Mail set, due to the lack of a normal defensive type. Given the nature of Pathfinder, Gorilla, and Hazard armor sets, I'm only going to include one of these so that I'm not comparing minor differences for like 12 different armor sets. Lastly, we will be using the Azure Guardian set as a baseline as it's given to the player and is a good medium to compare to. Now, as a disclaimer, I don't have every armor on this list, so I have not used all of them before. That being said, these are my opinions with a mostly informative mindset. I am not infallible in incorrectly stating something wrong or neglecting or mentioning a specific detail. Given that I am not a lockdown player, I will omit any discussion of PvP from this video. Since we're going to be using the Azure Guardian set as a baseline comparison for almost every set in this video, we should compare it first. The Azure Guardian set is meant to be the middle-of-the-road balanced option between a tank or a glass cannon build. However, despite being middle-of-the-road, it ends up being less useful given the nature of the game. In short, there are three main reasons why most armors may end up facing the same fate as the Azure Guardian set. These reasons being mobility, HP, and damage boosts. While the Azure set doesn't impose any mobility restrictions, it doesn't grant any either. Which, for a game where dodging attacks is a pretty important skill, isn't great. I mean, I guess people like to run fast too, so that, you know. Even if players aren't good at dodging and end up taking hits, it's still not a good defensive set due to the imbalance of actual defensive stats and HP. Defense is sadly not a great stat to try and focus on near late game due to enemy damage scaling becoming quite strong in Stratums 5 and 6. HP is also a significantly better stat than defense will unfortunately ever be, because it's such an easy stat to stack. You can start with silver health, without ever using any Vitapods in many instances. As the cherry on top, Azure Guardian is the only normal piercing hybrid armor that doesn't have a status resistance. I legit thought this armor had at least stun resistance, but no, it doesn't even have that like the Royal Jelly or Ironmight. It has nothing. Lastly, because of the Azure set's middle-of-the-road option, it doesn't get the benefit from any damage boosts like ASI or CTR, as abilities like that are reserved for the damage focus sets. This ends up leaving the Azure set as just a painfully mediocre choice for any mission. Despite this, it's still far from the worst option available. The Ironmight set is indisputably the worst, which is a shame because I like tanky playstyles in video games. The Ironmight just has so many things that just oppose with how the game plays. Much like the Azure set, the Ironmight is meant to emphasize defense more and fails horribly for the same reasons. Enemy damage scaling is strong and HP stacking is just too helpful. In fact, I believe that the Ancient set is better than the Ironmight because at least it gives bonus HP on top of the usual level 10 HP bonus, even though it's a pure normal armor set. The Ironmight also actively hinders players' abilities to output damage due to a universal ASI decrease. Now, could this be mitigated? Yeah, definitely, but the mitigation isn't worth the investment considering other armor sets we'll be discussing. So now we start our first branch of the normal piercing hybrid tree. Shame it's another defensive focus set. So, the Royal Jelly set swaps its defensive values and adds two status resistances. These are Stun and Sleep. While Sleep makes complete sense, Stun is a bit strange. Taking a look, there's only one enemy from both piercing monster family trees that can inflict stun. That enemy is the giant Colonel-Lycan. Granted, slimes do often get paired with enemies that inflict stun like lumbers and whackers, but it still seems a little silly. Despite this, I still think that the Royal Jelly set is better than Azure given that it has status resistances. The piercing defense is arguably more useful than the normal defense in tier 3 as some attacks can be a pure non-normal damage type. The Ice Jelly set is a cooler, pun intended, palette swap of the Royal Jelly set, but also swaps out sleep resistance with freeze resistance. With this in mind, I'd say that the Ice Jelly is just marginally better due to its less niche resistance. Mercurial is a set I'm quite fond of. I use it for almost all my piercing defensive needs. Granted, that's not saying much given my small selection of armors. When looking at the defensive stats between it and the Royal Jelly, I genuinely could not tell the difference between the two. I could very well be wrong, but without specific numbers, it's hard to tell. This leaves us with the status resistance change from stun and sleep to shock. You're bound to come across shock more often than stun or sleep, which is a boon in my books. This leaves us with the Mercurial set's ability of MSI low, which when worn together equals medium. Combine this with swift steps from your sprite, and you get a very speedy knight with room left for focusing on other damage modifiers via UVs or trinkets. While it's undeniably weaker than Black Cat, Chaos, and even Skolver, which we'll get to soon, Mercurial can be a fun set to build and play around with. The biggest issue I see with this set as a whole is that piercing and shock isn't a terribly common combination, and the two places you'll likely encounter these levels are compounds and the first arena of the gauntlet. Skolver has the least defense out of the hybrids. This doesn't matter because the small defense difference is so menial that it doesn't affect anything, even if defense wasn't a good stat. The main upside is the medium sword damage bonus, which speaks for itself, especially when paired with other trinkets and buffs. Skolver is just a universally good set, there's not much to say. However, its stepbrother that is the Starlit hunting set has the same issue that the Royal and Ice Jelly sets had. The same stats, but with far less common resistances compared to its freeze counterpart. So, because of this, it's not as good as Skolver. However, the spikes on the suit look cool. This set is strange to say the least. First off, this set has the same defense as Skolver and other sets with universal weapon damage bonuses. This is particularly strange because it doesn't provide a universal weapon damage bonus, but instead a damage bonus against slimes. Now that doesn't sound too bad until you realize that the status resistance is poison. Now, that sounds like a weird thing to nitpick, and to an extent it is. However, there are a couple of reasons for this. I don't know about you, but I don't often come across toxigels often. This for me makes this a strange set. On top of that, tox oils and compound polyps are significantly more dangerous and in a popular mission. Compound 42. Because of this, I'd honestly say you're better off forgetting this exists and just instead use Dragon Scale Mail. When in comparison to the Azure set though, I'd still say it's better than Azure because it does provide more benefits than just mediocre defense. The Justifier set can be both good and mediocre at the same time. That's a pretty weird hot take given that it's just the gun version of the Skolver and swaps freeze for stun res. Well, the reason why I say this is because of the monster families. To explain, guns are great against slimes where they're easy to target and hit. The mediocre part of the argument comes from the fact that wolvers and dust bunnies are from the beast family and they're often a nuisance to hit. They may not be infallibly nimble, gunning them down is more often than not a waste of time and not worth it unless necessary though. The stun res also feels like a bit of a wasted opportunity seeing that the only enemy with piercing damage that can stun is the giant lichen colony. However, if you're gunning one down, you shouldn't be worrying about being stunned in the first place. The Starlit Demo set off the bat, in my genuine and unprofessional opinion, is probably more useful than the Justifier if we're talking specifically in terms of piercing damage enemies. The logic behind this is that beasts and slimes tend to often clump together, making it quite easy for bombers to deal a lot of damage. However, if you want to counter this point, just wear the Justifier and use a Vortex Bomb with Callahan or Wintergrave. It'll probably give identical results. It's also got a damage bonus versus slimes medium, which a Starlit brother doesn't have. It however does have the same status resistance and weaknesses as the hunting set. This makes the Starlit Demo weaker than many of its contemporaries with the arguable exception of Volcanic Demo, which doesn't have any bonus damage versus slimes and just CTR medium. I don't know exactly how to rank these, considering many of them just swap one or two different stats or bonuses from each other. This makes this collection a hard one to judge. I will just compare the Sacred Firefly Pathfinder set due to fire becoming significantly more common in Tier 3 missions and the universal gun damage bonus. After some careful consideration between stacking ASI, CTR, and bonus gun damage, I'd have to say that Sacred Firefly Pathfinder is just 100% better than Justifier. This set also provides a better status resistance than Justifier's stun resistance. The only benefit that Justifier has over the set is its lack of shock weakness and better defense, both of which are completely negligible given the gun playstyle of Spiral Knights. And that's all of them. Frankly speaking, I know for a fact this isn't going to change minds, given that none of these sets can truly compare to the likes of Black Cat or Chaos, other than creating an off-brand build. However, I'm fine with that. This is more of just a silly video idea that I could somewhat easily produce. However, if there's something I didn't mention, or there's a counterpoint you'd like to say, leave a comment below. I'll make sure to do my best to read and respond to all the comments. But with that, I'd like to bid you guys farewell. Bye-bye.